Hey everyone, welcome to the ATA podcast and happy International Translation Day. I'm your host, Matt Baird, and you're listening to episode 15, The Value of Volunteering. We're also celebrating another milestone today. The ATA podcast turns 2. That's right, our first episode aired on September 30th, 2015. A very special thanks to all you listeners out there. You're the reason this podcast is still on the air. Each month on the podcast, we bring you news and insights from the American Translators Association. To mark this special day, we're going to talk with ATA President and longtime ATA volunteer David Rumsey about volunteerism. We'll also give David a chance to reflect on his presidency and time on the ATA board. David, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Matt. It's good to be back.
Right on. David, before we talk about the value of volunteering for ATA, it is International Translation Day, and it's a historical one. This is the first time we are celebrating ITD since the UN officially recognized it back in May, on May 24th to be exact. That's when the UN adopted a draft resolution recognizing the role of professional translators and interpreters and declaring September 30th International Translation Day. Now, many of us in the T&I industry have been celebrating this day for years. In fact, the International Federation of Translators, or FIT, has been promoting the day since the organization was founded in 1953. So David, tell us, what does this resolution really mean for translators and interpreters and for the T&I professions as a whole?
Well, the resolution from the UN gives official recognition to the work of translators and interpreters around the world, both those that work in industry and those that work in government. So one of the key consequences of this UN declaration is to help promote broader awareness of the work that we do and also the risks and the impacts that are associated with our work. This can be, particularly the case with interpreters who work in combat zones or translators who work on sensitive information. It gives the UN and hopefully the larger world a better sense of what we do.
Okay, tell us, how did we get here? Why did the UN decide to take up and adopt this resolution now?
Well, actually, people have been working behind the scenes and lobbying for this issue for several years. But I have to give credit to the recent head of FIT, the Internationale de Traducteurs et Intérprètes, which is sort of a global umbrella group of all different translator and interpreter associations, of which ATA is a member. Their president, Henry Liu, made a serious push to get the resolution passed. And FIT itself is a body that was created out of UNESCO, which is a program that has deep roots within the UN itself. So that really helped make FIT make its case to the UN officials who were voting on the measure. And they had 11 different countries that they needed to persuade to pass the resolution. And they got Azerbaijan, Bangladesh, Belarus, Costa Rica, Cuba, Ecuador, Paraguay, Qatar, Turkey, Turkmenistan, and Vietnam as signatories to the resolution. So it took a lot of work from behind the scenes to get this done, and they should be really proud of their achievements.
I agree. I think it's a really historic moment for translators and interpreters around the world. Now, does ATA promote, leverage, or celebrate International Translation Day?
Well, ATA has been extremely supportive of FIT's efforts with the UN to get this day recognized. And in the past, actually, ATA won the contest to come up for a theme for International Translation Day in 2016, which was Connecting Worlds, which really highlighted the importance of translators and interpreters in bringing various groups together in the economic, the social, the cultural, and the political sphere, by sharing information that we provide across different languages. And ATA also helped with this recent ITD. ATA has been working with the North American regional group of FIT to help set up a panel discussion on translation, interpreting, and human rights, which addresses some of the issues of language access and working in challenging theaters. So ATA members will be able to view that panel. I believe it's a video panel that you will see through links that will get published in news briefs and the Chronicle, etc. And of course, we'll also include links to this podcast as a way to celebrate ITD in its own way. So, the idea of ITD, the activities that go on are all really the products of volunteers. And a podcast on volunteerism and the TI industry is really a great way to celebrate International Translation Day.
That is one of the reasons we are here today, and that's a great segue into today's main topic, the value of volunteering. International Translation Day, it's a perfect occasion for talking about how we as translators and interpreters can get involved and how we can give back to our profession and help promote it around the world. And one of the ways we can do that is by volunteering for translation and interpreting associations like ATA. Now, you've been a big advocate of volunteerism throughout your presidency. You once wrote in the Chronicle that ATA is a big ship and that the engine driving that ship is a huge number of volunteers. Tell me, how many people volunteer for ATA?
Well, that's a tougher one. I mean, I would say at least probably upwards of 500 volunteers. If you think about all of the graders involved, all the different language pair combinations, all the graders for all those language pairs, all of the division leaders, everybody on every division's leadership council, as well as all of those people that aren't necessarily on the leadership council but are willing to step up and help coordinate some of the social activities. That's also the case for chapters, people who are involved in a chapter group, their leadership and their members who are volunteers. We have conference speakers. We have other volunteers who do a variety of different programs and different activities. So I'd say easily 500 volunteers or so.
Wow, that is a huge number. That's not just an engine. That's an entire power plant. Tell us a little bit why volunteers are so important at ATA.
Volunteers are really, I like to think, the fuel that keeps the ship running, and the ship being the ATA. The board kind of sets the course. I for the past 2 years, I've been kind of the captain. The staff are the people who man the engine, but the volunteers are really the fuel, because the board can have all the best laid plans and ideas for great programs. But if we don't have the actual volunteers in place, if we don't have the manpower, not to mention the money, to actually run the programs and to provide feedback or insights for improvement, then the ship will kind of stall in the water. If we didn't have everybody who was willing to step up and take part in the certification program, it'd be really difficult to have a certification program. And that's the case for lots of other programs at ATA that are out there.
Now, many members, many listeners might not know that the ATA president and all the board members, you are all volunteers as well. And David, I know that you've been actively involved with ATA for many years. Why don't you tell us, when did you start volunteering and in what capacity?
I can't actually remember precisely. I remember distinctly being at the Nashville conference, which was sometime in the mid-1990s, when a group of translators joined together to create the Nordic division. And I eventually became the second division administrator for the Nordic division. And that's when a lot of the volunteerism really kicked in full force. We were a very small group compared to the German division or the Spanish division. So we didn't have as many arms to twist. So when I stepped up and the assistant administrator stepped up, we basically we managed writing the newsletter, monitoring the listserv, coordinating the social aspects and the dinners, recruiting speakers, and giving sessions ourselves. So there was a lot of work involved. You learned a lot of different pieces of the puzzle of the divisions. And when we actually switched to the leadership council model, that's when things became a little bit easier. Prior to that, a lot of the work fell on the administrators and the assistant administrators. So that's really when most of my volunteerism began.
Why did you decide to get involved at the time?
Well, the short answer is that I really have a tough time saying no. So when the first administrator moved on, they asked me to take over, and I agreed. And I hadn't really thought about it too much. I actually liked the networking skills that were involved, finding people to write articles for the newsletter or write about people in the newsletter. And I liked the writing skills. It took me out of my translator mode, and I discovered that fundamentally I'm kind of an extroverted person, although I work in a very introverted job.
Yeah.
But that was the main benefit. So,
Tell us what happened next. How did you go from administrator of the Nordic Division to ATA President?
well, again, that's a question of I never really said no. So, at one point, when the Swedish into English exam was being created by a different group, one of the founders dropped out, and the certification committee asked me if I'd be willing to help bring the exam to fruition, and I did, and that was an enormous amount of work. Actually, that was tons and tons of work. But I also discovered working as a grader helped improve my own translation skills, and I really have a soft spot for all of the work of the graders out there that keep that program running, because I know how much work is involved in that. And at some point, and I'm not exactly sure when, one of my fellow Nordic Division members, Thomas Kostanainen, called me over the phone. I remember this distinctly, and asked me if I would consider running for the board. And again, I just said, sure, without much thought. So, and I eventually started a board career, and it was a few years later when the nominating committee asked me about running for president-elect, and at that point I agreed. But at that time, then I had to give it a lot more thought. So I've learned to think about things a little bit more deliberatively.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, what would you say is the best part about volunteering?
Definitely the other skills that you learn, whether it be new writing skills for a newsletter that I really, really enjoyed, or web skills you can learn for working on a division's website. There's also, people management skills if you're in a leadership role, how to manage people. There's also advocacy skills that people can learn if they want to get involved in some sort of advocacy with the government or on behalf of like Translators Without Borders or something like that. Or even like the technical skills that you're learning with this podcast. I mean, you've done lots of podcasts now, and you're still at it. You must enjoy that aspect of it. So.
Yes, I do, and I have to totally agree with you here. I've learned a lot of new skills doing this. This was something I had very little knowledge of, but was always interested in. I'm an avid podcast listener. I really enjoy podcasting. So when I was approached, here there's some similarities. I'm thinking about my own story as I'm listening to you, David, because there's some similarities here. Because sometimes it's somebody else with the idea that says, I want to do this, we need this, and I think that person's going to be great at it, and or could do it, and then you get approached, and if you can't say no, and I kind of have that problem too, then you do it. But in the end, it can turn out to be a really rewarding experience. But it's not without its challenges, and that leads me into my next question. What do you find, or what have you found was the most challenging part of volunteering?
Probably time management, actually. This job as president can definitely consume you. And in any volunteer situation, it's easy to overextend yourself. But I also think that a lot of people say, they can't take anything on when that's really not the case. A lot of people can offer more than they think once they learn to manage their time. There's a saying, who do you ask to get something done? Somebody who's already busy. That's because these people have the time management skills in place to manage multiple projects and multiple engagements. So people skills are also good. They're also tough. That was another tough part of volunteering because people are all unique. But I would say one of the challenging part of volunteering really is time management. And again, by volunteering, you will learn, as did I, how to manage your time effectively so that you can do what you need to do. And so there's a benefit to that.
And you have to do what you need to do while you're still, running your freelance business. You're still working as a freelance translator pretty much full time while you're volunteering, and now in these last 4 years as president-elect and president, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I have my allotted ATA time, which is usually in the morning, and then I have my allotted work time. And I've looked for fixes to be much more productive in both. So it forces me to look for productivity enhancements, and I've been able to manage both relatively efficiently, I think.
Now, we just talked about learning new skills. What are some of the other benefits of volunteering?
For one thing, you're working at something different. It takes you away necessarily from the translation stuff. If you're, say, a medical translator and you get involved in, I don't know, working for interpreters in combat zones, or you're working on an ATA website, it's a different field. So from medicine, but then you're involved in sort of politics or maybe a technical piece of the puzzle with the website. For me, on a professional level, I found working as a grader was instrumental in helping me improve my own translation skills to really get a good theoretical background of what I was doing and how I can improve my own translations. The key benefits I also found are networking opportunities that really help your business grow. This is a business that relies a lot on referrals, and knowing the right people and having access to their knowledge and their resources is key. Another couple benefits that you get is definitely decision-making skills. For those people that have a hard time saying yes or saying no, sometimes volunteering in certain places will force you to make yes or no decisions. People management skills are invaluable, especially if you're working in a group. Lots of us as translators and interpreters, we tend to work alone, and we tend to have our life set up the way we want it, and we do things the way we want it. And when we have to work in a group, that's a different skill. You have to make compromises and find ways forward that everybody can agree on, and those are really good skills to have. I've worked, on many sides of the industry as a project manager, a translator, and on the client side, and I've always been amazed at the opportunities, the variety of opportunities that there are in the industry. And so, one of the benefits of volunteering is to kind of discover different aspects of the industry overall.
I totally agree. One of the things I've thought about in preparing for this talk with you was the networking aspect of being a volunteer and working with other people that I would not come into contact. I might meet them at the conference every year, and there's several people that I've worked with in various capacities at ATA that I knew from the conference, but it was mostly just chit chats and seeing them at various events. But then having the opportunity to really work with them and get to know them on an entirely different level, I think it's extremely valuable, and I consider a lot of these people now my friends. Say one of our listeners is now interested in volunteering. Maybe we've piqued their interest. Can you give them some advice? Who should they contact?
Well, if you're interested in volunteering at ATA, I would, which I am definitely going to give an unadulterated plug for. Please volunteer at ATA. We never get enough people. I would say to start local. Either at the division or the chapter level, reach out to their leadership and offer to help. The divisions and the chapters are kind of the grassroots gateway to the association, and those chapters and divisions are always sort of slightly short of hands. They could always use a person to help spread the word and to help spread some of the work around. So that's a great way to connect.
How about any advice for people that are already volunteers? Do you have any sort of general advice after your many years of experience?
I would, be open to possibilities. Treat volunteerism like an opportunity to learn rather than feeling like you're donating your special skills, frankly, for no reward. So it's important to be kind of open about this, what you're involved with. You might learn new things, new ways of doing things, or new insights, or new knowledge from colleagues and staff, and that's the reward that you're getting. That's the benefit that you can get. And so be less inclined to think, well, I'm a master in web programming, and if they don't want me, to do it my way, then forget it. It's a little better to be more open-minded and learn from your colleagues about new ideas, new insights. So volunteerism really is a learning opportunity.
It's great advice. David, I'm sorry to say that this will be your last ATA podcast, at least as ATA President. In 1 month's time at ATA's 58th Annual Conference and coming up in Washington, D.C., you'll be handing over the reins to Corinne McKay. Are you looking forward to a little more free time?
I'd be lying if I said no, but yes, I am. I just haven't figured out exactly what I'm going to do with myself. I haven't scheduled in the time to think about what I'm going to do with my free time yet. But in talking to all of the past presidents, everybody's been pretty unanimous. They basically are saying, don't do anything for a while. Take a break. And I'm considering an extended meditation retreat. I've been on one of those. I did a really long one about 4 years ago. It was about a month long before I was asked to run as president-elect, and that gave me a lot of time to reflect on whether I wanted to do this or not and what the benefits would be. So I'm thinking I might do something like that in the winter, and that will give me some insights into what I want to do in the next chapter.
Now that sounds like just what the doctor ordered. But seriously though, how do you feel as your career on the board is coming to an end?
Well, it's really amazing to think how much of my career actually has involved ATA work, because when you mentioned earlier about when I got started in this thing in the mid-90s, I mean, I've had ATA with me all the way through the whole career. And it really helped me open my eyes essentially to the possibilities when I was starting out about different kinds of things that you can do. It helped me see many different sides of the industry. And a lot of translators don't know much about interpreters. You can learn a lot about interpreters through ATA, and a lot of interpreters can learn about translators and localization and all sorts of different things. So I've been really, really grateful for ATA for providing that broad vision of the industry and that broad avenue, a gateway for all the different types of possibilities that are out there. And as the president, you start to see the association and the industry from an even wider perspective. We're one association in a sea of hundreds of thousands of associations that are out there, both formal ones like ATA that have a more traditional structure and governance, and then there are a growing number of competing informal groups that you'll see on social media. And we also are seeing a trend in, obviously the industry is changing rapidly. Technology is playing a part in that. Consolidation, other types of commercial and social factors are playing into that. which I want to point out it always has in the past. We get upset about all this change, but it's important to remember when I started out in the 1990s, technology was still a part of the translation industry, and we were nervous about that. And what really inspires me is a lot of the younger and new voices at ATA who are coming forward, and they're really helping the association respond innovatively to those trends. So I'm actually quite an optimist. I like to think I'm an optimist by nature, and that's probably part of the reason I haven't overcome my inability to say no. So I suspect I will still be involved in ATA in some capacity if asked. So.
All right, you heard it here, everyone. What would you say was your most important accomplishment as ATA president? Or perhaps you can even go back as far as your time on the board.
Well, as president, I remember when I started out as president-elect, I told myself, if we could get the association back in the black financially, I would consider that, a key accomplishment, because everything after that was gravy. And the other day I was telling Corinne, it's easy to agree, for everybody to agree that we all need to make money. The question, the real fun begins when you have to figure out how you're going to spend that money. So I'm very grateful for everybody pitching in to make these typical decisions to bring the association around, and financially at least. So that I consider one of the key accomplishments.
What else have you been able to achieve? Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what you've been able to achieve during your presidency.
Well, it was funny. I have to write the Chronicle article about that, and it's all been a bit of a blur. And I know at the last podcast, Corinne and I were kind of brainstorming the things that we had accomplished, and it was actually kind of a surprisingly long list. I like to think that we as a board helped to accomplish a lot. I mean, I can't necessarily take credit for all of it, but I remember in my original speech at when I was coming in as president-elect, when we started out, I had focused a lot on the need to expand outreach to the general public and to businesses so they knew what translators and interpreters were. I still have a hard time explaining what I do to my own mom. So, and I think we've made pretty significant progress in that regard, particularly through the work of the PR committee and its Speakers Bureau. And we've had really good publicity this year through CNBC, which has helped really educate the public about what translators are and what it is we do. I also talked about improving our strategy with dealing with the government, who are, like it or not, they're getting increasingly involved in T&I through different types of regulations and standards. And we created a government relations committee to monitor and respond to some of the activities and queries that we get from state, national, and international level governments. There's been a lot of letter writing, coordinated activities with other associations. And as you may know, we're organizing an advocacy day at the conference this year where members can actually connect with their legislator and make our issues known to them. We worked on strengthening our relations with our sister associations and other related industries. In addition to the business outreach to other client associations, we made a conscious effort to connect with international organizations like FIT, but especially also interpreter associations. We attended NAGIT. We went to the Society of Technical Communicators. We went to FIT. We have a regular meeting with the interpreter associations throughout North America. And, one of the key achievements was being able to bring interpreters into the fold on the ATA website database so that some of their credentials could actually be recognized. That was a big plus. There's a lot of other ideas that really came to fruition. Offering a keyboarded exam finally came through. I can't take credit for that, but we were gung-ho and willing to take a risk to try the keyboarded model with more proctors and see if that would work. And that actually has proven to be quite successful. And, also we looked at improving member communications, what we're doing, and like things like ATA Talk Listserv, but also this podcast is a part of that, being able to let the members know what it is we do.
That is quite the list, David. Now, was there anything you would have liked to accomplish that you were unable to?
We did help to revive and revitalize and expand the webinar program a little bit. I was hoping we might be able to have expanded the professional development offerings a little bit wider. That's a challenging puzzle to find the right model there. And I'm sure that's going to be a key focus in the future, I suspect. The other is, actually, as I mentioned, I feel a little bit like the fact that we're now embarking on a new design for the ATA website really makes me feel like I've come full circle. Because when I started out as a board member, I said I wanted to fix the ATA website, and then for several years I helped work on that. And now as I'm leaving the board is seriously engaging in the process of starting to revise the website, and I think that's going to be really great.
What did you like most about being ATA president?
Well, working with a wide variety of people, I would say, is probably the best. It's essentially a people management job, and this was the best part. Was we're working with a wide variety of people and getting to know them, and working with them and helping them helping them be successful and be productive part of the board. That was really the key part, was the people.
What did you like least then?
Probably the people. I would say, it's working with a wide variety of people. I mean, and that's challenging in its own right.
Makes total sense. Great answer, David. We're coming to the end here of the podcast. Do you have any wise words for the incoming ATA president, Corinne McKay, or future presidents?
Don't let the bastards bring you down. No, no. Seriously, the key to this job is really ego management, and one of the biggest egos to manage is your own. And I found, the challenge here is to develop a thick skin. People have comments and they like to share their comments with you, positive and negative, and you have to be able to take them in and not let it affect you. You have to learn to say no, which for me can be a challenge at times, and also to let go of things that you might feel really strongly about. But the board or the members are going in a different direction, and you just have to be willing to pick your battles and let things go. So, I mean, ultimately the ATA it's a ship that's much larger than all of us, and your time on it is limited. So, as a president, just try to enjoy the ride, I would say.
Before we go, any final thoughts for our listeners?
Not really. I mean, this has been one of the greatest learning opportunities for me, and I do want to take this time to just let everybody know how grateful I am to all of the other board directors, all of the staff, all of the volunteers at the association, and all of the members, for their willingness to allow me to steer this ship for a while. It's been a real pleasure, and I've really enjoyed working with everybody.
I want to thank you, too, personally, for your service to ATA. I think you've done a lot, and you've made a difference, and it's been fun to watch. Thanks for joining us, and it was a pleasure talking to you today. Thanks.
Thank you.
That's it for our show today. Previous episodes can be found on ATA's website, atanet.org, under Resources. You can subscribe to the ATA podcast on iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, and other podcasting apps. And please leave a review on iTunes or spread the word on social. It really helps a lot. Speaking of social media, ATA has a Facebook. Yes, we're on Twitter, LinkedIn, so there's really no excuse not to connect with us. As always, I'd love to hear from you. Send your comments and suggestions to podcast@atanet.org. Who knows? Your idea might just be the next ATA podcast. Episode 15 was produced by myself with support from ATA Assistant Executive Director Mary David and ATA's IT guru Rashawn Paccarel. The music you heard today was composed by bensound.com. Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. Talk to you next month.